Good afternoon, and welcome to the inaugural UC Santa Cruz Distinguished in Teaching Award Roundtable. This award was established by the Academic Senate's Committee on Teaching in 2019. The challenges of the past 2 years delayed our ability to adequately recognize the first ever winners, but I am thrilled that we're now able to gather virtually to celebrate teaching at UC Santa Cruz generally, and these three extraordinary teachers specifically. The Committee on Teaching created this award as a counterpart to the Excellence in Teaching Award, the winners of which are nominated by students. The Distinguished in Teaching Award gives instructors an opportunity to nominate their peers and colleagues and to recognize pedagogical contributions that often go beyond any single course. This award particularly seeks to recognize instructors who've made significant contributions to educational equity within and beyond UC Santa Cruz. Our three inaugural recipients stand out for their commitment to educational equity and bringing research and experimentation into their pedagogy. They are Jackie Gehring, Legal Studies, our recipient for 2019-20, and John Tamkun, Molecular, Cell, and Developmental Biology, who's also a recipient for 2019-20, and Ingrid Parker, Ecology and Evolutionary Biology, the 2020-21 recipient. All three faculty have demonstrated a deep commitment to get to know their students and adapt their teaching to help students achieve deep learning. Congratulations to each of you on this well-deserved honor. I look forward to hearing about your approaches to teaching and the pathways that brought you here. Finally, thank you to the Committee on Teaching. The extraordinary and innovative teaching that unfolds on this campus every day has helped us to define ourselves since our founding nearly 60 years ago. And the Distinguished in Teaching Award is a wonderful way to carry that legacy forward and to celebrate the deep commitment to teaching and learning here at UC Santa Cruz. I'm now happy to introduce Sylvanna Falcón, who will moderate today's roundtable. Sylvanna is Associate Professor of Latin American and Latino Studies, Director of the Research Center for the Americas, and founder and director of our Human Rights Investigation Lab. She is also an award-winning author and educator. She was the recipient of the 2020 Golden Apple Award for outstanding teaching in our Division of Social Sciences. Thank you, Sylvanna, for bringing your own expertise as an outstanding teacher to bear by helping facilitate this conversation.
Thank you, Chancellor Larive. It's really, truly my honor to be here this afternoon and talking about something I'm so passionate about and love deeply, which is teaching. So I served on the Academic Senate Committee on Teaching for a number of years. And as a committee, we were always so impressed by the deep, deep commitment on this campus to teaching. And as a committee, we saw every single year how in every single division on this campus, there is an incredible dedication to teaching. It was quite frankly moving to read so many of the teaching award applications that would come to our committee. And so this new award, though, is different because it's one that was created by faculty and for faculty. And I'm so fortunate, and I feel like we're all so fortunate to be in conversation with three of the distinguished recipients today. During my time on the committee, we had a lot of very robust discussions about how to amplify and recognize the outstanding teaching that happens on this campus. And so what was different about this particular award is that we understood faculty see the labor and the time and the stress that that go into designing a new course and into our teaching and pedagogical practice. And so students see the final result, the fully sort of developed course in the classroom. But we wanted to design an award in which faculty could help us see which of their colleagues were going above and beyond in trying to have a broader impact in their teaching. And so as a committee, we engage with several questions during the creation of this award, including what are the qualities or characteristics of a good educator? How do educators approach pedagogy as a craft, needing to be flexible and adapt as the needs of our students change? How does their teaching impact their academic life beyond the university setting? How does a good teacher engage with their role as mentor, collaborator, and consultant to other faculty colleagues and to teaching assistants to help enrich the culture and scholarship of teaching and learning? We engage with larger questions about teaching in order to have faculty help us identify who of their colleagues was in fact going above and beyond to create life-changing experiences for our students. It was important for us to find a way to acknowledge the faculty commitment to teaching, who had a positive impact on our students, who support other faculty members to improve their craft of teaching, and who embody the strong tradition of distinguished teaching that has been at the heart of UC Santa Cruz's mission since its founding. Fostering innovative approaches, effective support and mentoring of students, and contributions to the teaching practice of others, whether colleagues or graduate students, is why these 3 recipients are being recognized in this afternoon's event. We knew in the establishment and planning of this award that we didn't only want it to exist as a recognition in terms of just being the recipient of the award. We wanted this to be an opportunity to bring our community together to be inspired and to learn from one another. So I'm truly, truly delighted to be in conversation with my esteemed colleagues here. I'd like to begin our conversation by asking each of the recipients to walk us down memory lane and remind us why they chose this as their profession, what keeps them committed to teaching, and to share perhaps any positive memories that have affirmed that they made the right choice in their career. And we're going to begin with Dr. Jackie Gehring. Dr. Jackie Gehring is an associate teaching professor of politics and legal studies. Dr. Gehring's teaching and research focus on comparative legal studies, the politics of memory, and the regulation of the body, especially racism, immigration, disability, and sports. For fun, she hikes, performs improv, plays strategy games, bakes cookies, and watches soccer. Thank you, Jackie, for getting our conversation started. And as Jackie joins us in the Zoom room, I just want to remind the audience that you can please put your questions in the Q&A box, and we'll get to those questions after each of our participants have had a moment to speak. Thank you, Jackie.
Thank you, Sylvanna. And thank you, Chancellor Larive and everybody else for coming. When I received this award, they said I would have to give a full presentation of teaching all by myself, and I have to admit that I'm a little bit happy that I'm getting to share the honor with two other people so that we don't all have to talk about teaching for the full time. There's this myth that professors only like to hear themselves talk, and that's not true in my case, I don't think. I actually really prefer hearing my students talk, and that's one of the reasons that I got involved in teaching as a profession. I love hearing how my students understand the world and how their understanding of the world can change or transform when they engage with scholarly work, new ideas, and other students who have different life experiences from them. And so that is the thing that really gets me excited about learning and brought me into teaching as a career. I say that as if that was just a logical conclusion, but I'm actually the first person in my family to go to college. And I had no idea that being a college professor was a job that people just did. I don't know exactly how you became them. I wasn't really sure on it, but I knew it wasn't something that there was a clear path to for me. And it took a professor of my own to recommend that I think about going to graduate school and think about becoming a college professor and explaining to me how the process works for me to even consider it as a profession. So when Sylvanna said, you know, what got you excited? What got you involved? It was honestly the mentorship of my professor at my undergraduate institution that really put me on this path and made it possible for me to think about the possibility of being a professor. So that got me started, but what keeps me sort of interested is that dynamic with the students that I was talking about. I really enjoy that experience of watching a young person develop over 4 years. And in my current role as a teaching professor, I often have students both in their first year, or if they're transfer students in their second or third year, but then again in the capstone or their one of their last classes that they take in the major. And it's really remarkable, I think, to watch students develop over their time as undergraduates. In particular, I find it really remarkable to just watch skills develop, how they become better writers, more critical thinkers, more disciplined. But I also find that our students can deepen their empathy, can deepen their intellectual flexibility, and their curiosity can be given a place to grow. And for me, that's the most rewarding part, is when I see a student who has really blossomed or developed in their 4 years or their 2 years in undergraduate education. And it never fails to amaze me how much that has happened, how what we do actually does matter, and how much students, when given the opportunity, can grow and expand on their paths. One of the questions that Sylvanna asked us to reflect on was a memorable time when we were like, yes, this is something we should be doing. And I think I have equally memorable times of, is this what I should be doing? And yes, this is what I should be doing. And they actually often go together. There are times when the grading workload is so overwhelming, or when I'm having trouble connecting with my students and understanding always, their perspectives in a particular situation. That flexibility that I want to help develop in them is something that I have to model and I have to embrace at all times. And the times when I am reaffirmed in that experience is when I see the work when I'm grading, and I see the progress that is being made, or students come to talk to me about their grades and try to understand how they can improve their skills or expand their knowledge. And also when that connection is reestablished, if I don't understand something or I'm trying to connect, how we create that space in the classroom where ideas can flow freely and students can be honest. I often have students share incredibly personal, challenging, controversial opinions in my classes. My classes are about things like disability and racism. We talk about eugenics. It's very difficult kinds of things. And always I'm amazed at the bravery that my students bring to those conversations and their willingness to engage with one another and reconsider their positions. And if I think about one thing that really drives my work as a teacher, it's that possibility of creating a space where we can re-examine our beliefs and hold them up to both other people's experiences and the academic literature on that particular topic, the social science that has been replicated, that has brought us new understanding of the world, and think about whether or not our beliefs are still in line with our new understanding of knowledge, and more importantly, have that skill to always be engaging with new ideas and new information and new people, and re-examining our positions in light of those situations. I always tell my students, you might end up believing the exact same things you believed when you walked into the room, when you leave the room, but hopefully you'll have developed an ability to question those things, and you come back to that belief with a certain amount of knowledge and evidence and care for it. And so for me, it's that process of growth, those transformations, and the idea that we're engaging with things that matter in our world and that can make our world a better place, that really drive my teaching. So that's what I have, Sylvanna.
Thank you, Jackie, for sharing those remarks with us. Next, I would like to welcome Dr. John Tamkun. Dr. Tamkun is a professor of molecular, cell, and developmental biology. He's been teaching and conducting research on epigenetics at UC Santa Cruz since 1989. Much of his recent work has involved the use of data analysis and visualization to reduce equity gaps and improve retention and graduation rates. Welcome, John, to our conversation.
Hello, everyone. So I'll tell you a bit about myself and how I got involved in teaching. So my first teaching experience was way back when, in the early 80s, during my second year of graduate school at MIT, when I TA'd a large introductory biology class and an associated lab class. So back then, TAs really didn't do much in the way of teaching. We didn't hold sections. A lot of what we did was grading or just helping to run the laboratory. So although I didn't really get a lot of teaching experience doing this, I really did enjoy my time as a TA. And so I thought, well, maybe I would go into teaching at some point. However, for the next 8 years or so, during the remainder of my time in graduate school and as a postdoc, I really focused on research. And I didn't really know whether I wanted to go into research, industry, or academia, or teaching as a career. So I had to make a decision after I finished my postdoc, and I was trying to decide where to go for the rest of my career. And I was considering offers at medical schools, research institutes, and a couple of different universities. And so I really gave this a lot of thought. And I decided that I would not be happy at a place where I would have limited opportunities to interact with students, including undergraduates and graduate students. So I decided to move here. I came here in 1989, but I was really, really nervous about teaching. I had no idea whether I would be good at it. I didn't have much formal training in teaching at all. And I was really worried that maybe I had gotten in over my head. But fortunately, my department would pair new assistant professors with experienced faculty. And I was really lucky in that I was assigned to teach a large cell biology class together with Barry Bowman, who's just an absolutely wonderful teacher and mentor. And so I taught with Barry over in Kresge Town Hall before it was demolished to build a new lecture hall. And teaching this class with Barry was an absolutely wonderful experience. He really taught me a lot about teaching and helped build my confidence. And so I found that I really enjoyed teaching and felt that I had made the right decision by coming here. So over the last 30 years or so, I've taught a broad range of different undergraduate and graduate classes. At the graduate level, most of my teaching has been in courses related to my area of research, which involves developmental biology, genetics, and epigenetics. I continued to teach undergraduate course in cell biology for about 10 years and then transitioned over to teaching a really large introductory biology class for life sciences majors, biology 20A. And I've taught this class once or twice a year for about 20 years or so. And biology 20A has really been my favorite class to teach. You know, even though it's a really, really big class, often 400 to almost 500 students in size. So I found that I really like teaching large lecture classes, particularly at the introductory level. Students tend to be really excited about this class because it's usually the first biology class they take here. And I really like the ability to hopefully have a positive impact on so many students at such an important stage of their careers. So far and away, my favorite teaching assignment. I've also taught a variety of other upper division major requirements and electives, including a new course in human genetics that I recently developed together with a colleague in my department, Elena Vasquez. So in addition to the kind of the more traditional teaching and lecture courses, the other aspect of teaching here I found really, really rewarding has been interacting with undergraduates and graduate students in my laboratory, in my research laboratory. These students have really made enormous contributions to our research, and it's been particularly rewarding to get to interact with students continuously over a period of multiple years, really have the opportunity to watch them develop and go on to successful careers as healthcare as physicians and research and teaching and a wide variety of other fields. And in terms of when did I really know that I had made the right career choice, at least for me, by going into teaching? I think it's when I run into students who I might have interacted with 10 or 20, 30 years ago and talk to them and see how successful they've become, and even feeling that maybe I had a little small amount of influence on them to help them develop and be successful, convinced me that I probably did the right thing.
Thank you, John, for sharing your reflections with us. Appreciate them very much. And I'm looking forward to our roundtable conversation after we hear from our final recipient, Dr. Ingrid Parker. My pleasure to introduce Dr. Ingrid Parker into the Zoom room. Dr. Parker is a professor of ecology and evolutionary biology and the faculty executive director of the UC Santa Cruz greenhouses. She's a fellow of the California Academy of Sciences and was recently elected a fellow of the Ecological Society of America. She's been teaching at UC Santa Cruz since 1998 and a SLUG alumna herself, Rachel Carson, 1987. She came of age with experiential learning, narrative evaluations, and ultimate Frisbee on the East Field. The virtual room is yours, Ingrid.
Thank you so much, Sylvanna. Yeah, thank you. And what an honor it is to be here. Thinking about, trying to think of the narrative of when some of my early experiences in which I discovered that teaching was a calling for me. I had to go back pretty far. In high school, I actually taught ice skating to beginners. And I got the kindergarten preschool class, which was awesome. And when you put 4-year-olds on the ice for the first time, it's amazing. Some of them just get out there and they shoot off like a rocket, and your job is to chase after them and make sure they don't hurt themselves. Then you've got the other ones who are really nervous and afraid, and the ice is slippery and they're uncomfortable in their skates and they're hanging on the boards and they're really not sure. And in those cases, your job is to help them get enough self-confidence so they can start to explore what their bodies can do. And I feel like I loved getting to experience the coaching of students across that whole spectrum, of course, everything in between. And that never goes away. That feeling never goes away. So I have these really very clear memories of sending my kids off into for their big annual show when they were heading out into the ice, and the dance of the Sugar Plum Fairies playing, and I would watch them go off and just feel like my heart was just going to break open. It was just so exciting to me to get to be a part of that. And I was so proud of them, and just to see them kind of what they had become. And I feel like that is just, it just never goes away. Every course, every quarter, to get a chance to be a part of that and watching students, young people, in their process of becoming is such an honor. So I definitely feel every day like I lucked out that I ended up in the right profession for me. Here I get a chance to teach a lot of different kinds of courses. I teach upper division classes like plant ecology and field methods of plant ecology. And in those kinds of courses, what you're doing is you're really coaching students as they make that transition from thinking like a student to thinking like a researcher or a scientist. And that's really exciting. And it also involves a lot of like developing confidence. And more recently, I started teaching a new course called Introduction to Field Research and Conservation. And that class is for first year students and for beginning transfers. And it's all experiential learning in the field. And we take them camping to the UC reserves. And we're incredibly fortunate that we have some very generous alumni like Julie Packard and supporters like Alec and Claudia Webster, who have actually offered donations that make it possible for us to offer these courses, give everything to the students that they need. So we take them camping, we provide all the gear, we cook for them, and we get a chance to invite students from all different backgrounds and all different majors who are just exploring what it's like to teach, to learn outside, and to get their first taste of research and natural history. And so so that's just super exciting, and to get to be a part of that and to help create that community of those students who are going to learn together as they move through college. So those are some of my experiences, and very, very proud to be here as teaching as a slug.
Thank you so much, Ingrid, for those comments. And again, congratulations to all three of the recipients for receiving the Distinguished Teaching Award. And now I'd like to welcome them, everybody back into the Zoom room so that we can have a little bit of a conversation. I want to remind the audience to please put in your questions in the Q&A box, and we will definitely incorporate those into our conversation. So now Ingrid has shared with us some of the classes that she teaches, and now apparently we all need to make camping trips and go learn in nature. But I wondered if, and John, you mentioned a couple of the classes on your end as well, but Jackie and John, I wondered if you could tell us a little bit more, or what are the courses that you teach at UC Santa Cruz? And Jackie, let's begin with you.
Sure. Most of my classes are both in legal studies and politics, and I teach the large introductory course to legal studies, as well as one other large course, which is comparative law, which looks at the way different countries organize their legal systems and how they make important legal decisions. And then I have little fun classes. They're not so little, they're about 55 people, but they're my electives that I get to teach about things I get really excited about. And that's a class on sports, racism, colonialism, a course on disability, politics in different countries and disability rights. And then a course on the politics of memory, again, in different countries, how we choose to remember certain tragedies or crimes and not others, and how that influences our contemporary political life. And then one last course on civil rights in different countries.
Great, thank you so much. John, what courses are you teaching at UC Santa Cruz?
So right now I'm teaching Biology 20A, Cell and Molecular Biology, which is a course that introduces students to the fields of biochemistry, cell biology, genetics, and molecular biology. So that's typically the first biology class that life science majors take here. And then also been teaching human genetics, Biology 118, which is a course that's taken by students who are about to graduate. So it's a elective for our majors, and it covers various aspects of human genomics, genetics, genetic medicine, and the course has a real emphasis on genetic counseling, both practical and ethical issues in that area.
Great, thank you. I want to try to talk a little bit about the research that many of us keep up with about the craft of pedagogy, and just kind of learning about different kinds of ways teaching can be informed by research on teaching. And Ingrid, I wondered if you could talk a little bit about how research on teaching has influenced the ways you teach.
Sure, yeah, I'd love to. I am really fascinated, particularly about the neuroscience of learning, so how the brain works and how we learn things. And just think of a couple of examples that I have implemented in my courses. And I love to share that kind of stuff with students too. I think they get really excited about it too. And so an earlier example would be more than a decade ago, there was some really interesting work on how note-taking influences memory. And a study was done where they had students taking notes during a lecture, typing out notes on a laptop, and not taking notes at all. And one of the fascinating things they found was that students who took notes by hand actually had better recall of the information. And so, and that was better than typing out stuff. And so sharing that information with my class, this was back in the era where a lot of students were bringing laptops to class. And so we had a whole conversation about like, what is it that your brain is doing and how do you maximize your learning in the classroom, and how does your technology influence that? Nowadays, everybody's got iPads. So a lot of students are coming to class and they're writing, but they're handwriting. And so now the technology has shifted again. And I think it's really interesting to think about how changing technologies, are now maybe supporting student learning better than they were before. Another example is that I'm a huge fan of the research on how we feel about ourselves influences our performance in class and in particular on exams. And so I always make my students before every test, I make them close their eyes and think of somebody in their life who just thinks they walk on water, like their grandma or their best friend, like somebody who just doesn't care at all about their performance in this class, but just thinks they're wonderful and can do no wrong. And just to kind of channel that feeling. And then we start the exam. And I think it's just, putting people in the mind frame where they can be their best. And I think it's really neat that the science of learning supports that.
I love that idea. I'm going to use that one about having them channel that kind of positive energy. What I loved about your response, Ingrid, is that sometimes when we can explain the decisions that we make to the students, they're more open to maybe why we're not uploading PowerPoint slides, and that there is some logic behind some of the decisions we make in the classroom. Jackie, I wondered if you had something to add here in terms of how teaching has influenced you, research on teaching has influenced you.
Yeah, one of the things I realized kind of early on in my teaching career was that, well, first of all, I hadn't really had any training about how to be a teacher, but also a professor, the kind of person that becomes a professor is often not a typical student. And so I had a lot of beliefs and ideas about how learning worked or about how teaching should work that were very much based on my own experience of a classroom and what worked for me. But my students are not all like me, right? And so that really pushed me to look at the research on teaching and learning and thinking. I'm also very interested in like the cognitive psychology of learning and what's successful. And so one of the things that I found a number of years ago was just this robust literature on testing and frequent recall and asking questions. And I just thought, man, I hate tests and I hated taking that. And I don't want to have to write them. I don't want to have to grade them. And so it was a real challenge to me to think about how can I implement the theories or the ideas about testing into my classes. So sometimes these include low stakes quiz. Sometimes they include me just asking questions in a sort of Socratic way, putting questions on the syllabus, trying to remind students to constantly be thinking about how they can prime their brain to remember the information that is being presented and to make connections between the ideas. So one thing I do now is a lot of short response quizzes, weekly quizzes on the reading or on the lecture, highlighting an important point and asking them to reflect on it. And, as long as they do it, they get a credit that sort of helps me on the grading front when I have 55 students that are doing weekly quizzes. But also really, I think, supports the learning. And I have definitely had pushback on that sometimes. Sometimes students want more. They want more assignments to separate so one thing is too important, but they also don't want to be doing stuff all the time. And so like Ingrid, I spent a lot of time explaining to them and actually assign an article that it's written for undergraduates by cognitive psychologists with study strategies. And one of them is about testing. And I try to explain why I'm doing what I'm doing. The other thing that I started looking at after first coming to UC Santa Cruz was the growing body of literature on trauma-informed learning, especially because so many of my students were having traumatic events in their lives or had come to me to talk about traumatic events from their past. And I think I had experienced this earlier, but not to the extent. I have much larger classes here at Santa Cruz than my previous institution. And it just felt like a real important need. And so I found that really coincided in a somewhat fortuitous way with the pandemic, because then all of a sudden we were all experiencing a collective trauma. And a lot of the things that I had thought about and learned from the literature on that was helpful to me. One of which was to try to keep things stable and maintain standards and be flexible at the same time, which is a really challenging thing to do when you have 150 students. But so, for example, I kept the exams, but I added an extra one so that they wouldn't all be as high stakes, but I kept the expectation that they would be answering certain kinds of questions and doing certain kind of readings. But then if a student came to me and said, I'm having this particular issue, to create flexibility, because the evidence for trauma-informed learning shows that most students actually perform well. Most people don't have a trauma response to trauma necessarily. And so trying to maintain that and giving people the opportunity to continue to excel, but also being flexible. And I have to say it was really challenging, but also really, I think, important in helping to keep students engaged. And I explained it to them as well, because I got a lot of pushback for being one of the professors that still wanted them to take a timed exam, or still wanted them to, I was like, I'm this terrible person. And I was like, well, actually, I'm really trying to help you succeed. So this is why, you know, and so I agree that informing students about why you're doing what you're doing can be really helpful. And I ended up having some of the best responses of students early in the pandemic, in particular, to that approach. Many students thanking me that they were able to still write their research paper and that I didn't just give up on the assignment. So yeah, that's definitely a really important part of my teaching, is looking at because I'm not like everybody else, it turns out. So yeah, like, and they're not all like me. Yeah. So.
Right. And sometimes you have to kind of develop a thick skin when you get that pushback, right? Because you're like, you know, it can feel like a little bit personal sometimes, but just to always kind of keep in mind that sometimes you don't see the rationale or understand the reasons until later. And the later might be a couple of weeks later, it might be the next quarter, but sometimes, you know, those realizations and come to the students about the decisions we make later. And so thank you so much for sharing your particular approach. So talking about how students are not just like us and they have their particular kind of needs and learning differences, I wonder, John, if you could talk to us a little bit about how you support students with different learning needs, perhaps certain kind of learning challenges, and because it reminds us that we have to be adaptable and we have to be accommodating in order to meet the students where they are. Especially, you know, you're in these large lecture halls that you were talking about, large lectures that you were teaching. What does that support look like to you from inside the classroom and outside the classroom?
So there's been a really large increase in the awareness of learning disabilities and differences over the past decade or so nationwide. In K through 12, there's more support than there had been in the past. We're seeing increasing numbers of students coming in who may have been diagnosed with a learning disability or difference before they got here. And then often students, once they get here, realize, especially if they're struggling academically, that there may be some underlying cause. In my classes, I've noticed that up to 10% or more of the students have accommodations of some form. Sometimes it's for a learning difference. Sometimes it's for a medical problem, mental health issue, wide range of different disabilities. And talking to the students in my class, you know, I've really found it striking how many of them are really struggling with this. They often would like to talk to faculty about their needs, but they're afraid to do so for a variety of reasons. And I think it really has a negative impact on student learning. So in my class, since it's usually taken by students in their first or second year, that's often when students are starting to realize that maybe there are problems contributing to their academic struggles, and they're not really sure what to do. So I think one of the roles a faculty member can play, a really important role, is to be willing to listen to students. And especially if you notice a student is struggling, and when you talk to them about various issues they're facing, you know, if it becomes apparent that they might have an undiagnosed learning disability or difference, to try to connect them with the appropriate support and resources on campus, and to let them know that there's no reason why they should be ashamed of this. There was one example I can think of that really stood out. There was a student who had taken my class with another professor, had failed it, was taking it with me, and they had failed it, or they were failing it. And I asked them, I said, well, have you ever been tested for any learning differences? And she said, yeah, I have a disability. You've probably never heard of it. It's called Asperger's syndrome. And I laughed to myself because my son is an ASPE. And I said, well, have you gotten any accommodations? She said, no, can you get accommodations? So a couple of phone calls later, she had her accommodations, and her performance skyrocketed. Rather than struggling in her classes, she started to get A's and B's and everything. I last heard from her a few months ago, and she's in graduate school now and doing really well. So this is something that often faculty don't think of as necessarily being part of teaching, but I think kind of playing a general role as an advisor or skills coach, or helping students get connected with resources is probably one of the most important parts of our job. And so I think the more we can do to help students, one, not feel bad about whatever challenges they're facing, but kind of lend a sympathetic ear and really appreciate some of the non-academic factors that can affect their performance is really important.
Right. I mean, given what you're saying, John, right, it's really seeing the whole student, and the whole student means that we have to sort of adjust and respond and both hear them, really hear them and what they need, and figure out how we can mobilize resources. Because I think what I'm also hearing from you is that sometimes we observe things as educators, as teachers, as professors in the classroom that they may themselves not be aware, could be an indication of just needing a different form of support in order to excel. So thank you for sharing that story about your student. We have a great question in the Q&A box that I want us to turn to. Oh, go ahead.
Before we move on, can I just add one more thing?
Absolutely.
I think on the disability front, because I teach this class on disability politics, and one of the things that the research finds is that although the rates of students entering university with diagnosed disabilities has gone up a lot, the people who are diagnosed are often not poor, first-gen, racialized people. Those people are often overlooked or seen as having sort of emotional or other types of troubles, not necessarily the kinds of things that they would be getting assistance for in an educational setting that's very helpful necessarily. And I think the kind of institution we have a lot of students who fit that profile. It's really important for us to encourage them to think about if they're struggling, to not internalize it and make it about themselves, and to consider, is there some other thing going on here? Are there other resources, whether it be the diagnosis of the disability itself, or even just, reaching out for support when they're used to sort of really pushing themselves hard on their own. I think it's really especially important because just the statistics tell us that learning disabilities and these kinds of things are really heavily undiagnosed and unsupported in particular communities. So I just wanted to point that out as well. I agree with you, John, that it's really important. I always have students who get diagnosed or get accommodations after they've entered my classroom instead of before.
Thank you, Jackie, for adding that. And I think it's so important what you're saying too is about, I think there can be a sense of feeling isolation, if you are like special and need these kinds of needs, as if it's like somehow exceptional, rather than as part of our responsibility as educators to make sure we're meeting the students where they are and whatever their needs may be. There's a great question in the Q&A box that I want us to turn to now, because I think it's a nice one to transition to. And talking about, it's been quite a ride teaching these last few years during the pandemic. And I wondered from this question, thank you for the question, what are one or two successful teaching strategies that you've used to keep students motivated during the pandemic? Why don't we start with you, Ingrid?
Wow. Well, I was lucky in that because I teach, well, lucky and unlucky. I was teaching a field biology class during the pandemic. And early on in the pandemic, I taught it twice online. And so that meant we had to have students do field work in groups, doing field projects like all across California, where they had to come up with questions that they could each answer and together combine their data wherever they were. And so it was crazy, but it was really also really amazing to see how the students were so creative, and they kind of turned lemons into lemonade in a lot of ways. I got a lot of feedback from them that even though they were sad not to be in Santa Cruz, still they took the opportunity to get to know the places that they had grown up and had never learned like the names of anything or studied any of the plants around them or anything. So I was really, I have to say, just to kind of turn the question around, I have been so impressed by what the ways that our students have been resilient and learned amazing things, and taught me too about what's possible. Coming out of the pandemic, so in the fall, I taught that course that I taught twice online. I taught it in person for the first time, and it was amazing to see, speaking back to Jackie's point about trauma-informed teaching, how traumatized the students were in terms of like coming back. They were afraid to, not because of being exposed to COVID, but they were actually, what they expressed to me was that they felt fear around being in community again, like to be interacting socially together in the same place. They felt very vulnerable and like they had sort of forgotten a lot of their social skills. And so I think, you know, we worked a lot on creating community. We did community, created community principles together. We had a lot of conversations about what it was like to be coming back from the pandemic. And so I think just encouraging them to be open with each other. And then after the course, like as they were evaluating what was important to them about the course, a lot of them talked about not the biology part, but just the fact that being back in conversation together was so healing for them and important.
Thank you, Ingrid. Yeah, I think the return has affected us very differently. The students have been affected in a particular way, and I think we ourselves as the professors in the classroom have been affected, in a different way. Like it is a little bizarre to be teaching in person without seeing the social cues of the students. And so that has required a kind of a recalibration too, in terms of how we ensure that they're retaining the material. John, I wondered for you if there's strategies that you've been developing to keep students inspired, motivated, and just to keep going during the pandemic.
It's been really challenging. As the pandemic progressed, I sensed that students were feeling more and more isolated and less engaged. So anything that could be done to keep them engaged and interacting in class with each other is very important. The other thing I found was really helpful that wasn't really directly related to course content was always to open the Zoom class early, and so that students could have an opportunity to talk and have social interactions with each other and develop relationships. And this is going to sound really silly, but one of the things the students started doing is when I was teaching from home, often one of my daughter's cats would jump up on me during class, which the students got to like. So I would introduce my pets during break, and the turtle and the cats. And so then the students started to bring their pets to class beforehand. And during exams, once they all brought their pets, and there were more puppies and kittens and turtles. There was one hedgehog, parrots. And so I found anything I could do to try to develop some type of social interactions between students before, during, or after class was really, really important, because they just seemed to be craving interactions of that type.
I love the incorporation of the animals into the classroom space. It really changes the whole dynamic of of the room, even virtually. And I'm thinking about all those meetings we've been in where we see a cattail through the screen, or dogs barking when they're not supposed to be barking. It just reminds us, that animals can give us a different sense of joy, and to bring that into the classroom and is really incredible. Jackie, I wondered for you if there's any particular successful teaching strategies that you've been using during the pandemic to keep the students motivated.
Yeah, I don't have pets, but I have bobbleheads and like these little dolls that I use to act out scenes. Like, oh, what happens when you have a fight and you have to moderate the fight? Anyway, so I've been teaching mediation this way, and I thought it was just because the pandemic had made me lose my mind, but then students said that was their favorite part of my presentations, were when I was having my stuffed animals engaging in conflict. So I guess it worked. One of the things that it's not what the question was, but I actually found it difficult for me to stay motivated during the pandemic. At times I found it really so challenging and difficult to, because it was exhausting to be constantly reimagining my courses, and I teach a lot of courses, so transforming many of them, and then are we going back, are we not going back, and it's just the world that we're in. But it became really, really difficult to stay motivated. And I think the thing that helped me the most was the relationships with the students themselves. And I agree with both Ingrid and John that whenever I could get them to connect, that seemed to really engage them. But also having in some of my larger lecture courses, I had recorded lectures, but then I would have a weekly meeting where anyone could come. It wasn't required because I didn't want to create stress, but anybody who wanted to come and talk to me and actually to have an actual interaction with me, as opposed to the recorded lectures, was invited to do so. And those were incredibly productive. And maybe only 25% of the class came, and yet they were really, I don't know, they were probably better than some of the in-person experiences that I've had with students. So I think that was really important. And the other thing I did was basically kind of what we talked about earlier with the meta teaching, like talking about how we teach and why we're teaching the way, why we have assignments. I kind of meta taught the pandemic. I was like, yes, we're in a pandemic. I talked about it a lot. Like, man, things are probably really hard. Things are probably really confusing. And in my emails to them, I was much more of a cheerleader than I normally am. I'm not exactly the biggest cheerleader professor, like, oh, you can do it. But like, I started being like, you can do it. Like, I believe in you. And if you can't, you should let me know, kind of a thing, to really remind them of their own. Maybe this is Ingrid's strategy to think about someone who cares about you, but to remind them of their own efficacy. And that although the world is insane, that they have this little thing is in their control, and maybe they can focus in on that. I don't know how effective that was, but because sorry, I asked for successful teaching strategies. I'm not sure if I'd evaluate the success of any of these things yet, but there are things I tried to do.
I think it just offers a level of just seeing them, that everybody wants to feel on some level, especially with so much isolation. So I know when students would join maybe the class late on Zoom, and they send me a direct message like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry I'm late. And I just said, we're just not going to apologize anymore. We're just going to say thanks for your patience. Because it's not that I don't think you're trying to get here on time. It's just I understand things are upended in ways that we're still adjusting, even a few years into the pandemic. I kind of want to pick up on the the kind of twist of the question that you did there, Jackie, about keeping ourselves motivated, because I think the students feed off of our energy. So if we're feeling a lack of motivation, it's going to project into the classroom space. And so maybe we'll start with you, John, talking a little bit about how are you keeping yourself motivated in this kind of challenging teaching moment of the pandemic?
That's a good question. I can definitely empathize with the students, feeling detached. For myself, what I make sure I do is I get away for part of the summer, and I just disappear into the woods. So if I didn't do that, I would completely lose it. So I think, in terms of self-care, for me, that's the most important thing. I'll go off and spend time in the Sierra backpacking with my daughter. So that really helps. And other than that, I found that and this was one of the advantages about Zoom. It was much easier to interact with students and in person at odd times. So often I found I could kind of stay engaged by just scheduling extra office hours and our opportunities to interact with students and for students to interact with each other. And especially at odd times via Zoom on weekends and the evenings as much as possible. And I found that really helped. I don't think I could have continued teaching if I would have just approached it like a normal class, showed up, turned on Zoom, turned it off. I don't think that would work for me. So I just made it a point of scheduling more opportunities to interact and meet with students, and also at odd times, and just to try to get away from all forms of technology as frequently as possible.
Yes, and I think, even just like picking up the phone instead of that email is always a good one too. Ingrid, I'm sure hearing that John goes out to the Sierras to replenish was music to your ears. I wondered if you could talk a little bit about how you're keeping yourself
Absolutely,
motivated
but
and
also what
inspired.
you just said about the phone, because one of the things I discovered in the middle of the pandemic was like, if I could say, let's not do a Zoom, let's just have a phone call. And how about you go walk around your block and I'll go walk around my block and we can talk on the phone and we'll be outside. That was, a huge sort of mental health discovery for me. It's been hard. I don't want to sugarcoat that, but I guess I do take inspiration, or it helps me to try to remember some of the things that felt impossible at the beginning and now feel like, wow, like, I don't know. I mean, I think the idea like a year and a half ago, like teaching in a mask all the time was so hard. And now I feel like as our students are like, why are these oldies so upset about masks? I mean, I just feel like people have adapted in ways that I never thought were possible. And I just think about how much I look to my colleagues and I'm so inspired. I mean, the way that people have changed their courses, and I had the dubious honor of being the chair of my department at the time the pandemic started. And so one of my jobs, this is a theme, I guess, was sort of helping people feel enough self-confidence to actually try to do the things that they needed to do to respond to the pandemic, and in terms of re-envisioning their courses. And we thought it was impossible. We thought it was impossible, but we did it. And so, yeah.
We did it, and we're still here having this great conversation. I want to talk a little bit, if we can, about what you would tell yourself, your younger self. What advice would you give your younger self, or perhaps to maybe a new educator who's in the room? What you maybe wish you knew when you were first starting out about teaching, and what you know now that you wish you knew back then, kind of question. So Jackie, I'm wondering if you can start us off with this one.
I've been thinking about this a little bit, and I don't really know where, like, I think the first thing I would say is to take advantage of the resources that are available that just didn't really exist when I first became a teacher. Like, we have the Teaching and Learning Center, and like they have all these wonderful resources, and there are people there you can reach out to. And with like online education, we have all these wonderful people there too who can help you with technology. And I think not trying to do it yourself is the real important. Trying to learn from others. And there are also within disciplines, there are always teaching and learning or pedagogy type conferences. There are conferences and organizations just for pedagogy, but within disciplines, at least in all the social science disciplines that I am loosely affiliated with, we have a teaching and learning or pedagogy section or separate conference. And I think those can be really valuable ways to, when you're first honing your craft, to hear how people do it within your discipline in particular. And so, yeah, I think for me, a lot of it is looking for help. I guess I could have looked up cognitive psychology research on my own about learning, but instead I was like, hey, we have colleagues who teach cognitive psychology. Do you think you could direct me to a good journal or a good article to get me started down this field of teaching and learning? And so I think asking for help has been really, really important. The other thing that I did is I stopped looking at my teaching evaluations in such a direct and obsessive way. I don't know if it's the same for everybody else, but I can get 90 amazing evaluations and 2 negative ones, and I'll obsess about the 2 negative ones for weeks. It's not healthy. And so learning to put them in their proper place and thinking about how I can actually evaluate the things that are important to me in my classroom. So I actually created my own separate evaluations about learning that was based on the cognitive psychology research that I administer myself in addition to our normal teaching evaluations that really helped me figure out, am I meeting the goals? Do students feel like they're learning the things I want them to be learning? Are there other ways that the learning could be improved? And I use them in concert with the more broad evaluations. So I would say those are some of the things. If my first time I taught, I got perfect evaluations. And the second time I taught, I got negative evaluations. And I was like, I did the same thing. So, making sure that you think about the broader context, I think is very important.
And your point sort of reminds us that you could have the same class in a similar syllabus and have a totally different experience. Like no class is ever the same, as it's all based on the kind of energy of the room. And thank you for offering that reflection on the teaching evaluations as well, because there is a way in which, especially when you're a new teacher, that one really, really like hard to take evaluation somehow takes over the like 75 that we're affirming. So,
and I would also, sometimes we talk about this, sometimes we don't, but of course, teaching evaluations are imperfect and they reflect the inequalities in society. So I remember one of my first classes, I got criticized for coming to class one day and my hair was a little wet still. And, I just can't imagine none of my male colleagues have ever gotten a critique on their hair in their teaching evaluation, or like once I was told I was dressing not quite right, things. So, and of course, for different types of situated people who experience all different kinds of comments. So to remember that as well, I think is helpful, because if you don't think about the context, you might really internalize some things.
Absolutely. Ingrid, I wondered if you had something to share here about words of advice for your younger self, or things that you
I have one really quick one, and then maybe a little one that's a little less quick. My quick one was when I wish I could go back and tell myself, when your students look bored, it's usually because you're talking too fast and too much, not the opposite. So I think there's like this, you want to fill more time. And that's generally related to all the things we learn as we teach more and more, is like cut back, make more space for them. The slightly longer one is related to something John was talking about earlier, which is I think it's incredibly important to take every opportunity you get to team teach with other people. So sometimes that's like teaching with somebody who's more senior to you, who has like all those hard-earned lessons that they've picked up about how to run a course efficiently, and also like I've had the opportunity to teach a bunch with junior colleagues who have been incredibly helpful and informative to me too, like who come into the classroom with a different kind of dynamic with the students and a different perspective and maybe some new technology. And just it's so, when I think about places in my career where my teaching has kind of jumped to a new level, it's almost always because I had the opportunity to co-teach with somebody and see how they interact with students, and kind of realize like we're each individuals. We're all what a teaching style that works for one person is not going to work for me necessarily, but to get to learn from watching how they interact with students and the material is just so helpful.
That kind of collaborative energy, it's really hard to duplicate that, right, without doing some kind of co-teaching. Some of the best conversations I have to say that I've had about teaching have been with community college instructors. They are amazing, amazing educators. And so I always think sometimes we talk, like how do we sort of cross that bridge in terms of who we're talking to about our pedagogical approaches and some of our teaching strategies. I would encourage folks to make connections with some of our community college instructors. There are really, really amazing educators. John, your turn to share with us what you would tell your younger self, or what you wish you had known back then when you were starting up.
Well, I would certainly agree with what Ingrid and Jackie just said. And the one thing I would add, and this is going to sound a little bit strange, but when I started teaching, I didn't really realize how big an impact that little things an instructor does or says can impact students' attitude towards their class and learning. So this is something I learned from my daughter when she was younger. She said to me, she said, "Poppy," that's what she called her. She says, "Poppy, your students must be really scared of you." And I'm like, "Well, why is that?" She says, "You always look like you're upset or angry." She says, "I know you're not. They won't." And I said, "Well, what should I do? Should I smile?" And she says, "No, you'll look crazy then." She said, "I don't know. Maybe you should just tell them that you're not angry all the time." So now at the beginning of every class, I say, "Oh, I may seem upset or angry, but this is just my personality, and I'm actually a really warm, fuzzy person, friendly." I said, "So don't worry about it, and it actually seemed to really help. And what I've noticed is that sometimes when colleagues get negative teaching evaluations, often it'll be in response to little things they said in class, maybe one day, part of one lecture, maybe after students did poorly on an exam, the way they approached it to students, rather than saying, "Don't worry, I'll help you do better on the next one." Instead, they let their frustration out, and the students can't distinguish between someone who's upset because they care about the students and someone who's just angry at them. So I would say to really pay attention to your demeanor in the class, and just being aware of how you present yourself and trying to make students feel comfortable to come in and talk to you or seek help if they need it is super important.
Yeah, super important. And I think too that idea that we can make mistakes. Sometimes we maybe have other things going on, and so we project some kind of like frustration around how they did on an exam. How important it is on the next day to just own that and just say, "Look, I had a lot of stuff happening. I didn't mean to approach it in this way. I would like to try, approach this process again." I think it's so important to be able to show our students that we are imperfect people too, and that we can make mistakes, and that there's something about modeling for the students when you can come back in the next class and just sort of take ownership of that maybe misstep or something that you said that maybe was just a little bit too cutting and just not enough finesse that can impact students. Because I think we have to always remember our words really, really impact them in really profound ways. And so we do have to be mindful of what we're saying and how we're saying it, and our demeanor in the process. I think the other thing that that I always think about is which I learned later and not as an early educator, was like, one bad class does not ruin the course. That there was a way in which I would put so much pressure on myself that every class just had to be like, you're going to call your parents and tell them how you were just blown away in class. And that just became an unrealistic bar, right? Because it was just created too much pressure on me. And then I forgot, that sometimes, and I tell the students, sometimes learning can feel a little bit boring, but you're still learning. And that's what we're trying to get you to do. But just to always, even now, remind myself, one bad class does not ruin the course or ruin the experience for students at all. And I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the challenges. We sort of hinted at the challenges, some maybe talked a little bit directly about the challenges in terms of the pandemic. But those challenges have also somewhat evolved over time. Some of us have been teaching for a lot longer. And so I wondered if you could talk about maybe how the teaching terrain has changed, and how some of those have some of potentially new challenges have emerged there. So maybe we'll start with you, Jackie, on kind of walking us through some of the challenges in the terrain.
Sure. There's a lot I've had. It's a good question. I think teaching is always challenging, and it's one of the reasons why it's rewarding is because it is evolving. And if I'm not evolving, I think I leave my students behind a little bit, or they leave me behind. I'm not sure who's leaving who. And so, one of the biggest changes for me is just I teach in an underserved major, and so my classes are enormous. Even my small class is 55. That's my upper division, and so this is really difficult to give students the type of educational experience I want them to have when there's so many of them in the room. So not just like the introductory course, but this is their elective that they're really supposed to be learning about research or digging into material. And so I'm always trying to innovate in ways that are giving them the experience of that and the support for developing those skills without making me work 80 hours a week. And it's challenging. One thing that I'm doing this quarter, it's a new experiment, is instead of them having a paper, they're doing a research poster where they're going to learn, they have to have a presentation of their work. And, but I know they all want to talk to me about their idea. Right. And so how do I make that happen? So I made them give me an elevator pitch. They all got 3 minutes and 2 minutes of me responding. And I was like, this is what we're going to do. We're going to be really focused and we're doing an elevator pitch. And, it's been going incredibly well because it gives them that contact without it becoming a detriment to the entire class, or me having to have like 16 extra office hours to talk to every one of these 55 students one-on-one about their idea. And I think that's always like a really big challenge for me is I want the students to feel like they can talk to me and be engaged with me, but also my workload gets in the way in certain ways. That's, I think, the nature of a public university as well. And I want them to feel, I always tell them, I'm also first gen, and I want you to like advocate for yourself and get in your professor's face and ask for the university for the things you need, because the students who aren't first gen are going to be doing that already. They don't even think about it. They just do it. But then I'm like, but don't send me so many emails, like you should do that. But like, also I have 200 students this quarter. Could you, anyway, it's just never ending. I say it with that laughter because I do want them to reach out, but also to think about what can they do and what can they ask for help with. I think that's a challenge. The other thing that is always evolving is thinking about how to make my classes more inclusive. The UCSC, I think, just keeps getting more and more diverse. I have more students who are born in other countries. I have more students who, California is their unifying characteristic, but have different types of identities or different types of struggles. And trying to make my classes as inclusive as possible, especially when the academic literature doesn't always keep up with the change of my students. So I have been trying, for example, my disability class, I redesigned it the last time I taught it to include so much intersectional new disability scholarship about, the similarities, for example, to being trans and thinking about one's gender identity, and also the diagnosis of a disability, and what does naming things do versus what does just being a person do, and having these complicated conversations and the attempt to engage my students more directly with where they are and the types of issues that are important to their generation that might not have been something that was ever even discussed in a classroom when I was, many ages ago when the dinosaurs roamed the earth, according to them. Sometimes they'll tell me about how old their parents are, and I just go, oh, okay, sure, that's not me, I'm not that old. And so that, both things. So trying to like the sort of the pedagogy of like how to balance, to keep myself not working too much so that I can be really productive with them when I am with them and like give them their attention, but also kind of try to keep up with what they're doing. Those are, I think, probably the two things.
Yeah, when you make a joke and it falls flat and you're like, I think we have a generational references that are not landing for some reason. And you're like, oh, right, you guys were born at a different time than I was. And yeah, that can be interesting challenge to actually update your jokes and update some of your reference points. Ingrid, I wondered if you could talk a little bit about the challenges and how you've seen them evolve given the sort of changes in terrain and education.
Yeah, I think one of the big issues, I think, is that as we move towards active learning, especially in science classrooms now, and we're using new approaches. One of the things we know from research is that students learn more when we make them struggle to understand the material, as opposed to when we stand up there and we give them a beautifully scripted lecture where everything is perfectly organized. But one of the challenges is that when students struggle, they actually project that struggle onto their instructor. So when you're standing up there giving a beautifully orchestrated lecture, they're like, oh, I'm so smart. I'm totally following exactly what you're saying. When you're like making them figure out stuff, they're thinking, I'm uncomfortable. I think my instructor really doesn't know what's going on and she's not very well organized. And I think that is something we're really struggling with now. And I know we're getting lots of support from CITL to think about, not to worry too much about our student evaluations from that context. And, but I think what's really important here is that we know that it's better for our students learning, even though we have to, it's sort of an ego thing and we have to kind of let ourselves realize that we're going to experience some, discomfort around that. And it just means to me that we have to support each other. It just means that these kinds of fora are so important, and to be recognized and support each other as teachers is really, really important, because it can feel demoralizing sometimes. So we need to support each other and help each other remember, yeah, this is the right thing to do in terms of meeting our goals of supporting student learning.
Yes, thank you so much, Ingrid. John, how about you in terms of challenges and the terrain of education, how it's changed?
Briefly, I would say, aside from the obvious technological changes, I began teaching, there was no email, no websites. People actually had to interact with other human beings directly to get anything done. So that's really changed. No social media, no cell phones. So all those changes. But I'd say the big thing is the dramatic increase in non-academic factors that negatively impact student learning and the student experience. Everything from increased cost of attending, increased cost of living in the area, uncertainties about politics of the nation and the world, global warming, climate change, you name it. Students are so much more stressed out than in the past, and often with good reason. So I would say that's probably been the biggest change I've seen, and it really worries me for students, and trying to stay positive and help them deal with all the significant distractions they have and problems they're facing outside the classroom is probably the biggest change I've seen.
Yes, thank you for those reminders. Well, I want to just thank you, all three of you, so much for this wonderful conversation and for sharing with us how you approach teaching, what teaching has offered you. Thank you so much for being distinguished teachers on our campus and affecting and impacting the lives of our students. I just wanted to give you each just a little bit of a minute, just to kind of wrap up any sort of concluding remarks that you would like to share that maybe you didn't get an opportunity to share. And maybe we'll start with you, John. Just anything that you would like to share to close out our conversation.
I would just like to close by thanking you and the organizers of this event and all the participants, and for giving us the chance to participate. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, John. Jackie?
The same. I want to thank you guys for hilariously, I really wanted to thank my department, but I think they've all left I think everyone just popped out. And I wanted to, because I actually, one of the best things about my job at UC Santa Cruz and having been at other institutions is my department. They're incredibly supportive. They're never going to hear this, but they're incredibly supportive and really wonderful. And really value, I'm a teaching professor, and none of the rest of my department is, but they really value teaching, and often invited me to talk about ideas about how to handle things like that came up in the pandemic, for example. And I've always felt really supported in maintaining a really strong teaching mission, which I think is really important. And yeah, I'm really grateful for an opportunity to talk more about my teaching always.
Well, don't worry, Jackie, it's being recorded, so we'll be sure your department sees the closing remarks here. And I can't stress enough what it means to have an amazing department supporting you, because I'm also in one of those departments, and it can really empower you and your teaching in ways that it's hard to actually put into words. Ingrid, you've got the final word here in terms of closing remarks.
I'm just so grateful. I'm so grateful to be a part of an institution that values teaching the way that UC Santa Cruz does, and the Committee on Teaching and CITL and all of the support that they provide yes. I have a friend who got a teaching award at another R1 university, and she was afraid to let anybody know because she thought that being a distinguished teacher was something that would actually count against her in her personnel cases in her department, which was so shocking to me. And I'm so grateful to my colleagues and how much they value teaching. And I feel like, we're just super lucky here to have these great conversations. So, and thank you for everything that you did today, Sylvanna.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you all for attending our afternoon discussion. We'd also like to take the opportunity to announce this year's recipient of the Distinguished Teaching Award, Professor Nick Mitchell of Critical Race and Ethnic Studies and Feminist Studies. Congratulations to Dr. Mitchell. We hope you'll join us next year at our next Distinguished Teaching celebration, when Professor Mitchell will share his experience and reflections on teaching. We want to thank our recipients again. We want to thank Alumni Week and all the staff who made this possible. We want to thank Chancellor Larive for taking the time to be here and for offering sustained support of the awards to honor and recognize distinguished teaching on our campus. Thank you, everyone.